I mean, I was going to try to frame the article for the Morning Star if this is like Owen Jones in another time, because Harry Whyte wrote about, all these really, the relationship between unemployment and suicide, for example, about non-payment of servicemen's arrears post-World War II. He writes this kind of stuff for a socialist worker. He's a very socially engaged journalist, but he never writes that article about gay rights. Nowhere.
He wrote this letter to Stalin. Maybe that's enough. This is a really...
I think that that's what he leaves us, the letter to Stalin. That is the crux of it.
When we have disappointed hopes about somebody, then they cease to be an inspiration. I think that he was more present in this project as an inspiration.
I mean, the first reaction is a total shock. A total shock in the sense that such a letter could have been written, right? And that was a shock, right? So to me, it was shocking to read a letter that, discussed homosexuality in the Soviet Union in a very straightforward way, in a very kind of theoretical way, in a very historical, theoretical way. So it was really shocking that the communists, to me it was shocking then, that the communists would try to defend homosexuality in the Soviet Union, that the communist would write a letter to another communist, meaning Harry Whyte to Stalin, and as a communist to a communist, try to argue in defense of homosexuality using precisely communist theory, and quoting Stalin himself in the letter, trying to prove to Stalin that leveling, as he puts it, in any area of life is anti-Marxist, that it's anti-communist, right? That I couldn't imagine a communist in the 60s writing a similar letter to Khrushchev, or a communist in the 70s and 80s writing a similar letter to Brezhnev, right? So it was out of the question. So it was absolutely, would be unthinkable, right? So the fact that Harry Whyte wrote such a letter in the 30s, in 34 to Stalin, well, I guess to me, it tells me that there must have been still an open culture in communist circles in Moscow, that the regular communists, well, foreign communists, but still, communists living in Moscow would raise those questions and direct them to the head of the communist movement. And so it was clearly that the culture was already in the process of becoming repressed, but some type of culture coming, I guess, from the 20s was still at play, right? Because no, as far as I know, no similar letter had been written to any other Soviet leaders after 34. And I think also Stalin's reaction, I think it's also interesting, right? So although he wrote on the margins of the letter, an idiot and a degenerate, right? Kind of defining, his view of Harry Whyte, he still archived it, right? So he put idiot and a degenerate, archive. so it's not something that he would reap and put in the garbage can, right? So this is still well, I don't think they would archive anything. I don't think so. So there is also certain, I don't know. So I think Stalin read it and he archived it, so he took it seriously, I think. Well, that's my take.
Could we go back to the shock that somebody would write such a letter to such a person at that time? And so do we think that that's because Harry Whyte thought that there would be some point to write the letter addressed to this person, and he thought that there was some communication that was possible, that Stalin would actually read this and consider it, and he thought that Stalin was active in some sort of revolutionary self-examination.
Yes, true. So Harry Whyte was coming, out of the 20s, right, in Soviet 20s, and or kind of with the knowledge of the Soviet 20s, 1920s. So a time of the liberalization of sexuality in many ways. So he must have felt that not everything is lost, right, already, that maybe it's a mistake. Maybe if he argues properly in Marxist terms with Stalin as a proper Marxist would understand the mistake of that law, right? Yes. So I think one other element that I wanted to mention in terms of being shocked, right? So I was also shocked by the fact that the existence of this letter proved to us that the 20s and early 30s in the Soviet Union were different. And there are a lot of, so there was a recriminalization, right? So which means that before it was recriminalized, homosexuality was, male homosexuality was recriminalized, it was legal or quasi-legal, right? So this was an absolute shock to me to realize that before 34, there was no criminalization of male homosexuality in the Soviet Union. I had no idea. So I was born in '72, and I took it absolutely for granted that that male homosexuality was always a criminal offense in the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire, and so that was another shock, which I'm still recovering from,
And I have a question to Yevgeniy. Obviously, when the new law was criminalizing homosexuality again in the 34, there must be a number of gay intellectuals, politicians, and artists who decided to emigrate from Russia at the time, right? Because of the homosexual persecution that started. I mean, people who could have emigrated, they did.
Right. I think, yes. I think. And again, I don't know any exact, statistics or more like anecdotes, but so by 33 was almost impossible to leave. It was very, very hard. I think the last year where you could leave, it was more or less okay. You could get a passport. You can leave. Also with problems and difficulties. It was 1926. So 1926 was really the last year when many people were able to leave.
Okay.
So for example, Ayn Rand, the American conservative writer, she left in 26, and she was one of the last to leave. Anyway, but no normal immigration after 26.
Of the Russian people.
Of Soviet citizens. Yeah.
Soviet citizens.
Yeah, you couldn't run. You couldn't leave. So that made it very difficult. And in terms of anecdotes, what I've read or heard, like there was there were a lot of marriages happening in 33. So a lot of gay people were getting married, you know.
Okay.
So it was like in the arts, in the army, you know. So it was like a pandemic of marriages, you know.
But I think that Angus, you mentioned it last week that Harry Whyte, he had a lover in Russia at the time, right? When a Russian lover.
Yeah, he had a Russian lover who was arrested.
The Russian lover was arrested because of the law.
Yeah,
under the law, yes.
The man was arrested in December 1933.
But do we know for sure that he was Soviet citizen? I'm not sure if the letter says specifically that he was a Soviet. Right, but he could have been another foreign correspondent. I mean, we don't know exactly if he was Soviet. The lover, I mean.
We don't know, no.
But we were talking about this last week as well, that Harry Whyte was coming from Scotland, which was a country that criminalized homosexuality at that time, very severely criminalized homosexuality. So they didn't have this period of liberalization, which happened in the Soviet Union. So maybe for Harry Whyte, the Soviet Union of the 20s and early 30s was like some kind of utopia of liberation and escape from his own oppression in Scotland. So maybe he felt this pressure, and maybe he felt this shock as well, that everything is changing in the negative direction in the Soviet Union as well, against his communist ideas of liberty. And maybe this shock and rage to some extent prompted him to write this letter to Stalin. But you know, Yevgeniy, so you know for sure that this letter is real, that this is not some kind of fiction that was invented by historians or artists or literary scholars. So this is a real letter, you know it for sure, right? Because last week Angus questions the reality of the letter for a moment, that the letter is something that you invented for your artistic project. And artists do such a thing, you know about it. So
sure, of course. I did not invent this letter. I did not fabricate it. But
it was in the humor section, right?
It was.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think maybe we need to check with Ben Healy and see if he actually saw it in the archive, if he actually saw the actual document, right, the physical letter.